Welcome to Knowledge 11, Lesson 7 for Grade 1. To the Pacific and back. This is the story about the end of Lewis and Clark's expedition, and this marks the end of the knowledge units for Grade 1. The closer Meriwether Lewis, William Clark, Sacagawea, and their friends came to the Pacific, the more Native American people they met. This land was home to many Native Americans who had lived there in settled communities for a long, long time. With the help of the Shoshones and the Nez Perce, the Corps of Discovery crossed the Rocky Mountains, which stood between them and the Pacific Ocean. A new, powerful river began in these mountains. The captains hoped to ride it downhill to the ocean, but the Nez Perce warned, in some places this river rushes through narrow rock canyons, moving so quickly and powerfully that it is difficult to control a boat there. You could be hurt if your boat hits the canyon walls or the sharp rocks sticking out of the water. William Clark and the group's best canoeist climbed the rocks to look down at this part of the river. They heard the roar of the water charging through the narrow canyon even before they saw it. Walking atop the rock from high above, Clark asked the canoeist, "What do you think?" "Captain," the canoeist answered, "I expect to play my violin at our next campsite downriver after we all get safely through this canyon." Clark grinned. "That's what I wanted to hear. Let us find the others." The men pushed off from the shore, and the pirogues and canoes plunged into the rapids. The mighty current pushed and pulled the boats, but working together, the men steered around rocks and away from the canyon walls, keeping their balance whenever the river threatened to tip over the boats. Finally, they shot out the other end of the rocky canyon and into calm water. John Shields turned to his young friend, George Shannon. "What do you think, George?" Shannon answered, "I was just starting to enjoy myself. Do you think they have any more of those around here?" And then both men laughed. Soon afterward, the men landed on an island in the middle of the river, just short of the place where the river emptied into the ocean. There, with the help of neighboring Native Americans, they survived another long, cold, rainy winter. At last, the weather cleared, and they were able to travel the rest of the way to the Pacific Ocean. There before them was the sight they had dreamed of seeing, the Pacific Ocean. Some of the men cheered, others stood in silent contentment. Sacagawea was amazed. She had never seen an ocean or even a picture of one. Clark heard that a whale had washed up on a nearby beach, and he took Sacagawea to see it. She told him, "I have traveled a long way with you to see the great waters, and now I have seen this monstrous whale as well. I am so happy to see the ocean." And then she walked along the sand, happily letting the waves wash over her feet. On March 23, 1806, nearly 2 years after first leaving St. Louis, the Corps of Discovery turned to head for home. They had mapped a great deal of the Louisiana Territory and beyond, from the Mississippi River to the Pacific. They now knew how to get to the Pacific. They could take the Missouri River to the Rockies, cross the Rockies on foot, and then take other rivers to the Pacific Ocean. They had made friends with many Native Americans. They found that no single river ran all the way from the Mississippi to the Pacific. they had learned about many animals, birds, fish, and insects. They had more adventures on the journey home, of course, but in the end, everyone got back safely except for a few who chose not to go back. John Coulter, the man from whom the Teton Sioux had taken a horse, told Meriwether Lewis, "Captain, I have heard enough of cities and crowds. I will stay in the West, if you will let me." So Coulter went to live among the Mandan people, promising, "I'll be here when you come back." And more than one of his friends did go back later to visit him. Sacagawea and her husband, Toussaint Charbonneau, with their little son that everyone called Pompey, went home to the Shoshone. Lewis and Clark told Sacagawea, "If it were not for you, we would never have succeeded." Sacagawea replied, "You showed me the great waters. We are friends. We helped each other." Setting off again, Lewis and Clark watched Sacagawea with her son in her arms, waving from the shore until a bend in the river blocked them from sight. Months later, the travelers reached home. There they said their goodbyes and went their various ways, some to more adventures and some to quieter lives. Perhaps you would like to know what happened to the 4 people who had been most responsible for the journey. Meriwether Lewis became governor of the entire Louisiana Territory. William Clark became the governor of Missouri, and then spent much of the rest of his life working with Native Americans on behalf of the government's newly created Bureau of Indian Affairs. Thomas Jefferson continued as president until 1809. 8 years later, James Monroe, who had arranged for Jefferson to buy the Louisiana Territory, was himself elected President of the United States. And this brings us to the very end of Unit 11, the last unit in Grade 1 Knowledge Curriculum. I hope you have enjoyed learning all year this year, and I hope you come back and visit some of these YouTube videos to remember what you learned in first grade.